October 19, 1987. The Dow Jones drops 22% in one day, trillions erased, phones are ringing off the hook, traders staring at screens like they're watching the floor disappear beneath them. But here's the twist. The crash didn't start that morning. It started months, sometimes years earlier. Because a market crash isn't an explosion, it's pressure building inside a financial machine, and when that pressure finally releases, it doesn't leak, it detonates. So what actually happens when the market crashes? Let's slow it down. First, there's optimism. Not normal optimism, supercharged optimism, the kind where people stop asking, is this worth it? And start asking, how much higher can it go? Prices rise. Then they rise faster. New investors rush in. Stories get louder. In the late 1990s, internet companies with no profits were worth billions. In 2005, houses doubled in price in a few years. In 2021, meme stocks and crypto coins with cartoon logos were worth more than century-old companies. Different assets, same pattern. When prices rise fast enough, risk feels invisible. Then comes leverage, debt, borrowed money, and debt is quiet in good times, silent, helpful. If you borrow $10,000 to invest and your stock goes up 20%, you feel like a genius. You amplified your gains, everyone applauds, but debt works both ways. If that same investment drops 20%, now you owe more than your position is worth, and the broker doesn't send sympathy, they send a margin call. Add cash, or we sell, and here's where crashes accelerate. When prices fall, margin calls multiply. When margin calls multiply, forced selling begins. When forced selling begins, prices drop further. It becomes mechanical, cold, automatic. This isn't panic, this is math. During the 1929 crash, leverage in the stock market was widespread. Investors were buying stocks with as little as 10% down. When prices started falling in October 1929, margin calls cascaded. The Dow eventually fell nearly 89% from its 1929 high to its 1932 low, not because every company vanished overnight, because debt turned a fall into a collapse. Now zoom forward. September 15, 2008. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. $639 billion in assets, 158 years of history, gone. That morning, something subtle but catastrophic happened. Banks stopped trusting each other. Modern economies run on short-term lending. Banks borrow from banks overnight. Businesses roll over loans to make payroll. Money moves constantly. But after Lehman, trust evaporated. If a firm that big could collapse, who's next? So banks hoarded cash, interbank lending markets froze, and when credit freezes, the economy gasps for air. Companies can't refinance debt, hiring stops, layoffs begin, consumers hear layoffs are rising, they pull back spending, lower spending hits corporate profits, lower profits push stock prices down more. Another feedback loop. Unemployment in the US peaked at 10% in October 2009. Over 8 million jobs vanished. More than 4 million homes went into foreclosure. This is when crashes stop being abstract. This is when they become real. But before we get to layoffs and foreclosures, there's another step: liquidity. Liquidity is just a fancy word for how easily you can sell something. In calm markets, liquidity is deep. There are buyers everywhere. In crashes, buyers disappear. You try to sell at $100. There's no bid. Next buyer is at $95, then $90, then $80. Prices don't glide down, they gap. Because in a crash, everyone wants the exit. But exits are small, and crowds are large. This is what happened on Black Monday in 1987. Automated trading systems were programmed to sell as prices fell. It sounded logical. Protect the portfolio. But when those algorithms triggered simultaneously, they created a wave. The Dow dropped 508 points in one day. At the time, unprecedented. Liquidity didn't just thin, it vanished. Crashes expose weak spots in the system. Sometimes it's leverage. Sometimes it's innovation. In 2008, it was mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, loans bundled together and labeled safe. When housing prices began falling in 2007, those securities started unraveling. Banks realized the assets on their balance sheets weren't worth what they thought. And when banks don't trust their own assets, they definitely don't trust yours. Confidence cracked. And once confidence cracks, fear spreads faster than facts. Investors sell, funds face redemptions. They sell more, hedge funds unwind positions. More selling feeds selling. Meanwhile, news headlines amplify everything. Market in free fall, banks on brink, global recession. It becomes psychological because markets are driven by expectations. When expectations collapse, prices adjust violently. But here's something important. A crash does not mean companies instantly become worthless. It means uncertainty explodes. Markets price in worst-case scenarios, sometimes worse than reality. That's why crashes often bottom when headlines look catastrophic. In March 2009, the S&P 500 bottomed while unemployment was still climbing. In March 2020, during the COVID shock, markets fell over 30% in weeks as lockdowns spread globally. Air travel stopped, offices closed, entire industries paused. It felt systemic. But then governments stepped in. Central banks slashed interest rates. The Federal Reserve pushed rates near zero. Emergency lending facilities appeared. Fiscal stimulus flooded economies. Not because everything was fine, because if the financial system collapses, everything collapses with it. After the Great Depression, the US created the FDIC in 1933 to ensure deposits, because bank runs can destroy economies faster than wars. After 2008, regulations tightened capital requirements for banks, stress tests became standard, guardrails were reinforced. Crashes always leave behind new rules, but before recovery comes something else: forced transfers. Crashes transfer assets, from over-leveraged investors to liquid investors, from emotional sellers to patient buyers, from those who need cash today to those who can wait 5 years. If you panic sell at the bottom, losses become permanent. If you're forced out by debt, you don't participate in recovery. But if you survive, if you stay solvent, history shows markets recover. Not instantly, not smoothly, but persistently. The market eventually recovered after 1929, after 1973's oil crisis, after 1987, after the dot-com bust, after 2008, after 2020. That doesn't mean crashes are harmless. They destroy wealth. They wipe out businesses. They strain governments. They create anger. After 2008, protests erupted in places like Zuccotti Park in 2011. People felt the system protected the powerful and punished everyone else. Trust was damaged, and trust is the invisible glue of finance. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Market crashes are not mysterious black holes. They are stress tests. They expose overconfidence, excessive leverage, weak regulation, poorly understood financial innovation, and human psychology under pressure. First comes greed, then comes leverage, then comes a trigger, then comes forced selling. Liquidity dries up, credit tightens, the economy slows, governments intervene, stability slowly returns. The cycle doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes every time. So when you hear the market is crashing, understand what that really means. Confidence is evaporating, debt is being unwound, liquidity is shrinking, credit is freezing, fear is spreading, and somewhere inside the chaos, the system is recalibrating. Because crashes aren't the end of markets, they're the violent reset, painful, unpredictable, but mechanical. And once you understand the mechanics, they stop looking like monsters and start looking like consequences.